Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, information, sports. No, wait, we don't talk about sports. We do talk about arts, though. We're going to talk about arts a little bit this week, actually. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing just fine today. It's a glorious Friday in East Tennessee. How about you, Jesse?
I'm fine. Yeah, it's a nice September light out our windows here, and looks like it's going to be a nice, if maybe slightly warm weekend, but hope everybody is having a good one. We have sort of a mixed bag of things to talk about this week. There was an interesting confrontation at a planning commission hearing this week between two former city council members. We'll talk about that. We have an update on All for Knox, the now 5-year-old joint effort by the city of Knoxville and Knox County to try to bring resources together to fight the ongoing opioid epidemic. The Big Ears Festival, which occurs every March right here in Knoxville, internationally acclaimed music festival. They released their the lineup for their upcoming festival this week. We'll just kind of touch on that and talk about why that's important to us here locally. Knox County Schools is taking some steps in accord with a new state law to provide extra levels of safety when it comes to students and spectators at sporting events who may suffer cardiac emergencies. Talk about that a little bit, but Scott, I think we need to start off, speaking of threats and emergencies at schools, with what has been sort of the biggest ongoing story of the week. Just about every day this week, we had reports from the Knoxville Police Department and the Knox County Sheriff's Office that they were arresting Knox County students, often quite young, for making violent threats at schools. And this was something that just kind of seemed to keep going all through the week.
Yeah, it just seemed like all of a sudden, there's going to be random threats, from time to time in a system as large as Knox County's. But 6, 7, 8 a day is pretty amazing, and several days in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and these kids are young. They're 12, 13,
yeah,
14 years old.
We had a total, so far, I mean, we're recording this on Friday morning. Maybe somebody's out getting arrested right now, but through Thursday night, there had been 14 students arrested over the past week. And I think out of those, only 2 were high school students. They were almost all middle school students, ranging in age from sort of like 11 to 14 or so. And of course, this came right on the heel of the terrible shooting the week before at Apalachee High School down in, is it Winder, Georgia? I don't actually know how to pronounce it.
I'm not
sure. Small town in Georgia, of course, where a 14-year-old has been arrested and charged for going into school with an assault weapon, basically murdering 4 people, 2 teachers and 2 students, and then wounding several others. His father has also been arrested because allegedly he's the one who provided the gun to his son, even after the boy had made online threats that local law enforcement had come out and talked to the father and the student about. And even after that, the father allegedly gave the kid a gun, which then ultimately he took into school and murdered people. And so I think a couple things happened. And of course, this is, needless to say, not the first time that this has happened in an American school. I do think that case was made a little bit, it got people's attention maybe even more than other school shootings because of that background, because he already had made threats, they had identified him, they had been out and talked to the family, and then he still went on and allegedly committed the murders. And so I think that put even more focus and emphasis than there already has been on any students making any kind of perceived threat. And this has been growing, obviously, for the last 30 years, ever since Columbine, where, the kinds of things that kids, maybe back when you and I were in school, Scott, if some kid happened to make some flippant remark about, I'm going to bring a gun in here or whatever. I mean, even when we were in school, that's the kind of thing that maybe a teacher or a principal might have talked with you about and said, that's inappropriate to talk about in school, but it wouldn't necessarily have been treated as an actual threat. And because, kids say all sorts of things, and especially now in the online age, anybody can go online and basically just kind of say anything. A lot of younger people do not have well-developed senses of responsibility and consequences, especially, if you're a kid growing up, you spend a lot of time on social media, you see people saying all sorts of things on the internet. It might not sink into you that this can have real world consequences. So I do think that this particular instance put more focus on that, but it does seem to also be the case that something about that Georgia incident and the coverage, the attention it received, I don't know, led to a much higher number than usual of those kinds of threats being made. Superintendent John Reiswick gave a press conference this week where he said that, yes, they do, there is sort of some base level, quote unquote, normal level of threats that they see or hear about, and that they hadn't seen anything like this. What they've been kind of, on the receiving end of, or that people have sent them over the past week. Hey, this is out there on, Instagram or TikTok or wherever the kids are posting these things. The other thing that has been unclear, because these are minors, and so very little about these details of the charges have been reported. What we've had reported is their ages, their genders, and the schools that they were at. But it hasn't been clear sort of like what specifically they did, what were the threats that were made. There was in one case a list of quote unquote target schools that was circulating. Unclear where it came from, unclear if some of these kids who got charged, were maybe just kind of forwarding on or reposting something that came from somewhere else. So it seems like it's kind of a mishmash of things that are going on there. But it had a very real effect on a lot of parents and families. The school system, I think the day after they had the first big wave of these and the first big wave of arrests, something like 25 to 30% of kids stayed home that day, right?
Yeah, they typically the attendance rate at Knox County Schools system-wide is 93 or so %, and they were down to 68%. On Wednesday. So.
Yeah, and the school system obviously is taking it seriously, and our local law enforcement is taking it very seriously. Sheriff Tom Spangler, as he has said in the past, came out and said again, basically, we have zero tolerance for this. We are going to treat these threats seriously, and it is illegal, in case this has escaped anyone's attention, it is illegal to make a threat of violence against a public school. You can and will be charged with that, whatever your age. And of course, all of these people being charged for this are minors right now.
Well, there was one adult.
Oh, right. There
There's
was an
senior,
18-year-old
yeah.
at Halls High School. Yeah. But everybody else
is a juvenile, and presumably everything will be handled in the juvenile system.
And it's going to be very disruptive for these kids. I mean, they'll have the criminal issues to deal with, which I'm sure is never fun for anybody. But they're going to face serious disciplinary action at the schools too, up to and including, suspensions, expulsions. Some of them may be sent to alternative school placements, those kinds of things. But probably all of them are going to have a very disrupted school year because of this. And, I have already seen some people raising concerns about that side of things, that is this the best we can do in response to this whole issue of school shootings, is to just kind of create an increasingly punitive regime where 11-year-olds are being charged as criminals for things that, again, maybe in prior generations would not have been treated as criminal charges. And then they, that can be have a lot of impact on a young person's life to go through something like that. And, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be charged, but I think that does go back to the bigger picture of, are there other steps at the broader societal level that we might that might be worth considering in how we approach this entire issue? Because I do think that what you're seeing, I mean, Senator J.D. Vance, the vice presidential Republican candidate for president after the shooting in Georgia, they kind of asked him, do we need more gun restrictions? Because this is something that people talk about a lot in this. And he kind of towed the party line and said, no, absolutely not. What we need to do is harden our schools. And, our schools are already pretty hardened. The doors are locked. They have armed officers at them. When people talk, when the continual answer as this happens over and over is that we just need to harden the schools more, you start to wonder, like, what is your ultimate vision of what schools are going to look like at the end of that?
Yeah, and the school in Georgia had a high-tech hardened system where they could, push of a button on your phone, on a phone would shut down the school.
Yeah,
and didn't stop anybody. Stop the shooter. And to your point of previous generations. I remember being in school and people, I won't say routinely, but from time to time would talk about shooting a teacher. Or something like that. And I was also the generation where not just a handful of people, but would have their hunting rifles in their truck,
sure.
and things like that. So I mean, it's a very different time.
Yep.
And
I can chime in on this one. I was a junior or a sophomore or junior in high school when Columbine went down. And
Seth Barber, our producer, ladies and gentlemen.
The first of the new era of school shoot, whatever you want to call it. I remember Columbine specifically being really weird as a student and having to experience that, even though it was far away as a student. But yeah, that's when I had a friend who made a less than smart joke as a 16-year-old in a his band class or something like that, just kind of made a ridiculous, dumb thing to say that happened to coincide with the idea of a school shooting, and it was not a fun year and a half of her remaining high school life. She did end up graduating, but it was a big to do.
Yeah.
On a bad joke, and again, it's not excusing the bad joke, but it's also kind of reinforcing the kids don't think that smart about what they're saying sometimes. And do we want to ruin lives for a joke in poor taste?
Yeah. Well,
at this point too, it's because of things that have happened since Columbine.
Sure.
Because of all the shootings that have gone on at schools, you've got to, I think the, school officials err on the side of caution.
They do not have a choice at this point. I don't think. I mean, even before that Georgia shooting, I think this was true. But especially given the specific details of that Georgia shooting, at this point, our law enforcement agencies and our school officials just they do not have any leeway. They don't have any discretion to try to say, "Oh, was this a joke or was it not?" Because the stakes are just clearly so high.
But I think, to follow that, I think as well as that is, I think even kids making poor jokes and stuff like that, they know better at this point. Like for my friend, at least, this was a brand new thing. This wasn't decades. This wasn't our entire schooling life. This was the very end of our schooling life when this happened. And so that joke a year earlier would have been no big deal. And now they lay the hammer. But now it's a generational thing. The kids should know better on that point. At this point.
Well, and obviously, for anybody out there who's a parent, presumably you have had these conversations with your kids. I certainly have had them with my kids from early on, just whether you're at school or whether you're at the airport or whatever, just don't make any kind of jokes about guns or bombs or anything at all, because it's not funny, and there's going to be severe consequences. And obviously, 14, maybe we're at 14 students and counting here in just the last week or so in Knox County who have been reminded of that. It just seems like and it is scary, as a parent. Like every time one of these things happen, if you start thinking about it in real terms, like, oh, what if this was my kid's school? I mean, it's a terrifying thing to contemplate, and I totally understand parents being scared about it.
It happened to your kids.
Yeah, well, right. My older son, when he was at West High School just last year, a gun went off in the classroom. Nobody got seriously hurt. A teacher actually got slightly hit by some shrapnel. It's a real thing, and it's a sad thing. And I think the one thing you can say now that what was Columbine, 1997? 98, around there. So we're 25 plus years past Columbine, and one thing you can say is we have not solved this problem. Okay, well, on a somewhat less grim note, I guess, but still having to do with school safety, we had a story this week about the distribution of new defibrillators in Knox County Schools. Of course, the defibrillators, they're the machines that you can use to try to restore somebody's heart rhythm after a cardiac event. And schools were already required by state law to have at least one in every building with people trained to use them. But now they are getting more of them because another state law passed this year specifically saying you have to have them available at sporting events, at high school sporting events in particular. And Scott, one thing that was interesting about this was it actually came out of a very high-profile case at a National Football League game a year ago that people may remember, where Damar Hamlin, who was a player for the Buffalo Bills, collapsed on the field after he had a collision with another player and happened to take a sharp blow to the chest, which disrupted his heart rhythm, which can happen. And there were medics, it's an NFL game, so there were people right there on the sidelines. They jumped in, they saw his heart had stopped, they used the defibrillators, they used CPR, and eventually got him to the hospital, of course, and he made a full recovery, but definitely could have died. And that prompted the NFL and a bunch of other sports leagues to come together. They formed this national coalition with the American Heart Association to educate people specifically about the potential dangers for people who are involved in athletic activities. And so now many states across the country, as a result of lobbying by that coalition in the past year, have passed laws saying you have to have defibrillators and people trained to use them at sporting events and in schools as well. And so the school board approved some policy changes was earlier this month to basically say that, yes, we're going to have this. They've already ordered a bunch of them. They have them. Their sports teams are using them when they travel as well. So they have machines at the schools that they can check out and take if your team is going someplace that maybe is doesn't have them. Or the other thing is, if you're a football team going to play at another school, that school will also be required to have the defibrillators. But where it gets trickier is like cross country and that kind of thing, where you're not necessarily going to a school facility and you're out on a course somewhere. And so they are required by state law, you have to be able to respond within 3 minutes.
Wow.
And so they have to figure out like where, if you have a cross country course, like where on this course can you station that so that you'll be able to respond within 3 minutes anywhere on the course. So it's creating some sort of logistical challenges for them, but it's, I don't know there's much else to say about it, but it was just kind of an interesting thing to see that, it shows you the way an event, maybe in a more positive way than the Georgia shooting, an event at the national level that gets everybody's attention can lead to actual practical responses at the local level.
Well, and one thing too, while that incident did prompt this, and they are thinking, okay, we need to, to have these devices close by the athletes. It's really the fans that are most at risk of having heart. You always, I routinely read about someone having a heart attack at a particularly exciting ball game or something like that. So it's, having, a defibrillator. You were talking about, going to another school. Well, assume that you're on a football field and the home school, the home team has their defibrillator on their side of the field. You're the visiting team. You've got one on your side. One of your fans is the one who has a heart attack.
Yep. Boom,
you're right there, and you don't have to get their attention across the field and wait for them to come across and everything else. So, my guess is that these will save more lives of fans and players, but it's good that any life that they need to intervene in is worth saving.
Yeah, that was a point that Jerry Harnish made. He's the operations manager in Knox County for AMR, which of course is our ambulance provider. And I talked to him about this because AMR does have their own crews at many high school sporting events that they just kind of station there as community service essentially. But he said that even at that, because again, it depends on sort of where their crew is stationed. If something happened, like, the more defibrillators and people trained to use them, and it's not that the training is not that hard. It's a fairly basic machine. The better, so that even if it is a difference of a minute or two of getting the lay people responding while the paramedics are responding from across the field or whatever, that is still going to be very valuable because those first couple of minutes really matter. But yeah, he made the same point that realistically at a high school sporting event, cardiac events, yes, they can happen on the field, but the place where they're most likely to happen is in the stands.
Yeah, it's grandpa watching, watching this kid play or something like that. But grandpa's life is valuable too.
Absolutely. So. All right, let's talk a little bit about Big Ears. And as always, we have to make the disclosure when we talk about Big Ears. My wife works for Big Ears. It is a nonprofit based here in Knoxville that runs a big annual festival. But we covered Big Ears extensively before she worked there, and we will continue to talk about it because it's a big deal. It's one of course, we have lots of major events on the calendar here over the year. Arts and culture events and sporting events and so forth. But Big Ears is unique in many ways among Knoxville's major events, and they made some news this week.
Yeah, well, I mean, Big Ears is unique because it is a truly international festival. It's not, we have lots of festivals that are regional, local, some that celebrate, ethnic heritages from other countries like Ireland, or
we just had the Knox Asian Fest.
But this is a truly international festival, and there are people that acts from all over the world. People come to Knoxville from all over the world, and so it is. That's in and of itself. It is a big deal, and and you mentioned that we always make the disclosure that your wife works for Big Ears. That means that little journalism ethics lesson for you guys. I have to be the one to cover Big Ears because Jesse doesn't, because his wife works for Big Ears. And actually, you're the ones who pay the price for that, because Jesse is a far better arts reporter than I am, but I get to do it instead. So
I think you do a great job.
Well, thank you. That's anyway. But yeah, they announced the lineup for the 2025 Big Ears Festival, which is going to be March 27th through 30th, the 30th next year. And this is the first installment of the lineup, because Ashley Capps, the founder of Big Ears, always adds to it in the months between the announcement and the opening day of the festival.
Yeah.
And but already there are more than 100 artists. They'll be playing at 14 venues all over downtown Knoxville. It basically turns downtown Knoxville into a festival grounds, and you go from venue to venue. There aren't really, for the most part, there aren't really tickets. You get a wristband, and
right, you can get a weekend pass or day passes. And I think right now all that they're selling are the weekend passes. The day
right now.
Passes will come later.
And yeah, they're selling those at beers.org. And but you can go, you can drop in the middle of the show. You can, go to, take in 15 minutes of one show, go to another venue, and take in another 15 minutes, go to a third venue, take in, it's just a real, with all those artists and all those venues, you can't see everything and do everything, but there's a, as is typical with Big Ears, there are all kinds of genres, all kinds of music. There's things that you've never heard of before that you will have the opportunity to see, and that's one of the things that has always been fun for me. I mean, I'm a very kind of normal, traditional 60-year-old. As when it comes to my musical taste, I usually, I listen to 60s and 70s rock for the most part. That's the stuff I grew up listening to. And I listen to some Americana. I listen to, a little bit of swing stuff, but I'm not really that adventurous musically, except during Big Ears. And it's always fun to go in to a place and just be wowed by music that you've never heard of. You would never have heard it before, as it was. In fact, there's one group that is going to be here that did that for me a couple of years ago. It's Daka Braka, and it's a Ukrainian folk rap band. I guess you call them, but they're Ukrainians. They've taken Ukrainian folk music, and then they throw in instrumentation and themes from other musical genres,
all while wearing traditional Ukrainian garb.
Yeah, and they with the huge wool Cossack hats and things like that. It's really quite a show.
Yeah,
and one of those things that if it weren't for Big Ears, no one here would ever have seen it. But there's some really interesting things going on. There's one that Johnny Greenwood, who was with Radiohead, as a composition. It's 8 hours long. No, you don't have to sit through the whole thing. You can dip in and out like I was talking about before. 8 hours long. So St. John's Cathedral, and the pipe organ is the central piece of it. But it's a very strange experience, and it's very much tailored to the venue. In fact, the composition is, in general, is called X Years of Reverb, and they name each performance for the age of the venue.
Oh, yeah.
In Knoxville, at St. John's, it's going to be 133 years of reverb because St. John's Cathedral is 133 years old, and it's beautiful church, great acoustics, be a real interesting show. I confess I will not be there for all of it. I probably won't be there. I know I won't be there for most of it. I'll be there for a little bit of it. Some other music, Philip Glass's music in 12 parts turns 50. There's going to be a performance of it. Tyshawn Sorey, who won Pulitzer Prize, is going to be here. Lots of people that are Taj Mahal will be here. Then there's some favorites that show up every year, like Bill Frisell, Sun Ra. There's there's a lot of familiar faces and familiar.
Right, I think the Sun Ra Orchestra is playing with Yola Tango, the sort of beloved indie rock band. So that should be an interesting combination. And
we've got all the international stuff. We also have some local stuff. There's local poet and songwriter R.B. Morris is teaming up with Will Wright, who writes our music for us.
That's right.
Here. But Will Wright for a world premiere performance of Morris's book Mockingbird. He's going to read from it. Wright is going to provide music for it. It's just going to be a showcase for some local talent as well.
Yeah, and tickets are pretty expensive, as anybody knows if you've been there before or gone to look at this year's ticket prices. And so, for those for whom that is a challenge, first of all, there will be day passes available, but also there always are publicly accessible free events as part of the festival, and none of those have been announced yet. But there's always, even if you're not a ticket or pass holder, there are always things going on around at and in and around Big Ears that are accessible to people. And as we've talked about before, one of the fun things for those of us who live here, like lots of most people who come to it come from out of town, and like you say, many from out of state and out of country. But for those of us who live here, it just, in the same way that a home football weekend, especially like a big one, like a, home football weekend against Florida or whatever, transforms the whole city and turns the whole city into sort of like a big sporting experience for that weekend. Big Ears does that, but on an arts and culture way. And so all of downtown, even if you're not going to anything, you can just kind of be downtown, see the people here from all over the world and the country, and kind of absorb the reverberations, I guess, of the festival.
Well, you can, in some venues, you can walk past, hear some of the music. I mean, you don't.
Yep.
Ashley might only say that, but you can't just loiter out in front. That's kind of boring. But you've got all this music going on. You've got people going from event to event, which makes the streets and the sidewalks come alive, and then you hear different accents and different languages, and it's a real neat cultural weekend for Knoxville.
Well, that is coming up next March. I'm sure we will talk about it when we get there, but in the meantime, of course, you can find information about it at the Big Ears website. All right, let's talk a little bit about All for Knox. And this is a joint city-county initiative that started in 2019 as the opioid crisis was continuing to escalate. And the real point of All for Knox, and you can look it up on, they have their own website, is to try to bring together and coordinate ongoing efforts around substance misuse. And that's bringing together, public efforts. So the whole thing is kind of under the umbrella of the Knox County Health Department. And so there is, sort of the literal public government side of it, but a lot of it is about coordinating efforts by nonprofit organizations who are engaged in that work, ranging from education and prevention to treatment and recovery, and also to bring together good data and information, both about sort of the scope and scale of the ongoing challenge of not just the opioid crisis, but the impact of substance misuse across our community in general. Of course, the opioid crisis has been sort of like, center stage of that for quite some time now, but it is not the only thing happening. And also to provide good information about what services are available, what resources are available, and also identify areas that maybe, that there are needs where more resources could be brought to bear. And so this past week, they had their fifth, because like I said, it started in 2019, their fifth annual meeting to kind of report out on how things are going. And, on the one hand, things are not going well. If you just look at the numbers, like the year that they formed All for Knox, in 2019, the previous year, 2018, we had in the vicinity of 320, 330 overdose deaths in Knox County. Now, overdose deaths are clearly not the only way to measure or look at the impact of opioids, because, the impacts of that extend far beyond just the people who have been killed by it. But that is the starkest metric, and kind of like, if you just want to get some sense of the scale of what's going on, it's in a lot of ways the easiest single number to look at. So since they started All for Knox, that number, actually, it did kind of plateau in 2019. There was some sense that, maybe there was a chance that maybe things are we're kind of getting a handle on it. But then both here and across the country during the COVID pandemic, opioid use exploded, overdose deaths skyrocketed. And then we went through a series in 20, 21, 22 of just kind of setting ever higher sort of new records. Now, in 2023, that number came down a little bit. I think in 2022, the county reported an estimated 544 deaths, overdose deaths, which is a very high number for county, Knox County size. And it came down, according to the dashboard that you can find on the Attorney General's website, to 485 in 2023. So that's good, seeing any decrease after 20 years of mostly just annual increases, is obviously positive. And that trend has also been reflected across the country. The national number dipped down a little bit from 111,000, I think, to about 108,000. So about a 3% or so drop at the national level. Again, that's also good, but we're still at what would, prior to the last few years, numbers that would have seemed astronomical. And I think at the national level, one number to keep in mind is that relatively early on in the opioid epidemic, the number of overdose deaths in this country surpassed the number of highway fatalities for the first time. That had never happened in history until about 10 years ago. And since then, it has just, continued to surpass it. And now more than twice as many. I think last year we had in the vicinity of 40,000 highway deaths in this country versus, 108,000 overdose deaths. So more than double, like 2.5 times as many people in the United States dying from drug overdoses as die in car accidents. So just, even if we are maybe, hopefully, you can't predict anything from 1 or 2 years, but even if the combined efforts around education and prevention, the distribution of naloxone to try to treat people who are in overdose, even if that is having an impact, if we are plateauing a little bit, we're plateauing at what is still an extremely high number that continues to have a very high both death toll and also broader toll on people's lives and our community. Given all of that, the overall tone at the meeting was, not exactly positive, because these are hard things to talk about, but optimistic that all for Knox and the various agencies and organizations that are all engaged in this work, they are working toward the things that they were set up to do, which is to provide, first of all, better, more detailed information on the people who are being impacted by this. They have an overdose fatality review team that meets regularly, where they bring together people from all of the different agencies that interact with these cases, and they actually look at a case-by-case basis. Like, they look at somebody who died, and they look at, what do we know about this person? Had they been arrested before? Had they been in treatment before? Like, kind of looking at where were the opportunities to try to help them before they reached the point where they actually died. Are there gaps there? Are there places where resources could have been brought to bear that might have made a difference? So they're taking that really kind of forensic look at those cases. They're also building databases that will be publicly accessible of all of the kinds of treatment and recovery options that are available out there, specifically, sort of who they treat, how they treat, whether they're what level of certification they have, because there are certifications that there are standards for treatment and recovery. There are national and state level standards for treatment and recovery, and so they want to make sure that people who are going into those kinds of programs are accessing high quality options, and just basically continuing the effort to coordinate all of these different pieces of this extremely complicated issue, and keep people talking to each other across different organizations, across different government agencies, and make sure that they're all kind of seeing the same things and understanding, trading information back and forth about what they're seeing, sending up early warnings and flares. It can come down to the specific level of, holy cow, this weekend suddenly we're seeing a whole bunch of overdoses in this particular area, which can mean that maybe somebody got like a bad batch of stuff that's being circulated, and they can put that kind of information out at the kind of granular level, both to law enforcement, but also to the social workers who are out there every day, say, engaging with our local homeless population. They can spread that word, be like, hey guys, like, there's bad stuff going around. Not that it's not all bad stuff, but like, there's especially bad stuff going around.
Poisonous bad stuff. So.
Exactly. And so really trying to attack it at that granular level where it's directly affecting people every day.
Yeah, but one of the things that makes it really difficult is that by its very nature, people who, use opioids, are furtive about it. They're not, they're not at the corner bar drinking the way alcoholics are. They're, at home or at a friend's house or wherever. They try their best to hide it because it is illegal. It is, and so I think a lot of times, they're talking about opportunities for intervention. A lot of times, those, because of the kind of secretive nature, the first time anybody outside of a few friends, anybody knows that somebody is doing is addicted to opioids is when they have an overdose.
Yeah,
and so there in many cases there probably aren't opportunities to intervene until it's too late, sadly. So.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that they talked about, several of the people who spoke at this meeting emphasized the ongoing need to reduce the stigma around addiction, and just kind of acknowledge that, look, this is a very widespread thing, and it happens all across our community, and one of the things that keeps people who maybe know that they need help, maybe want to try to, change their life and their habits, there's a lot of fear about what that's going to mean for them and for their family. Maybe it can be, it can be hard for a family. Maybe the family knows about it, but they don't want to talk about it with anybody else because there is a lot of stigma around it. People who have struggled with addiction and are in recovery, a lot of times, try to kind of keep that quiet. They don't want their coworkers to know, or they don't want, even friends and family to know. And so there was a lot of talk about the need to reduce that and make it okay for people to say, I need help. Our family needs help. This is something we have dealt with. This was our experience dealing with this, because the more of that kind of talk there is out there, the more people might hear it and say, oh, okay, maybe this is something I can talk about and seek help for. So that was a major focus. The other thing I wanted to mention, because you mentioned the corner bar, one of the speakers made the point that as we continue our necessary focus on opioids, it's also important to remember that actually the single biggest ongoing substance misuse problem we have in the United States is not opioids, it is alcohol. Yeah. And where there are 108,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. last year, there were 178,000 alcohol-related deaths. They don't present in quite the same emergency way, because those alcohol-related deaths tend to be, the accumulation of many years of abuse. So it's not quite the same kind of thing where it's like, oh, they used and, fell over. But that toll is, the toll on our healthcare system, and of course on family life and communities and everything, including drunk driving, of course. Yep. All of those things that, alcohol, our legal drug, remains our worst drug in many ways.
Yeah, that kind of gets lost because it's very rare for although it happens, very rare for someone to drink themselves to death in one episode.
Right.
It does happen.
Yes, you can get alcohol poisoning. That's a real thing.
And but it's very rare, so there's no real correlation between it and an overdose, where you overdose and you're in danger of dying right then. And we have, as a society, accepted alcohol as being a drug that it's okay to use for the most part.
And none of us on this show, to be clear, are abstainers when it comes to alcohol. However, we do very much encourage responsible and thoughtful use.
Yes. But you interjected that, and you derailed my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, it was. I had one of the most brilliant insights into opioid addiction that you would ever hear, but no more.
Well, if you think if you think of it, you can pipe up later. It's
okay.
one of the dangers of live podcasting without a net, as we do. Anyway, you can find more information about, we did write about that meeting, the All for Knox meeting. That's on our website. And of course, you can find information about All for Knox at their website. And then, Scott, just a sort of, I don't know that it's a major issue, but an interesting little back and forth happened at the Planning Commission on Thursday between two former city officials.
Yeah, it was, for the most part, it wasn't too controversial of a meeting that they had on Thursday. There were, there are always the, rezonings and plans reviews and things like that. But this was kind of interesting because of the players involved. It was a very minor issue in the grand scheme of zoning and land use. But Mark Campen, who is a former city council member, he served 2 terms representing the 5th district in North Knoxville. He has a 5-acre piece of property kind of in West Fountain City, almost to Inskip, off of Cedar Lane. It's got about 5 acres there. It's an investment property for him. There's a house there that is a rental house, and he was wanting to have it rezoned. And it wasn't a dramatic rezoning. It was from still low density, from RN1 to RN2, and the major difference, although there are others, or lot sizes. You can have smaller lots in RN2 than in RN1. That's one major example. That is one of the reasons things like that happen. He's wanting to build a duplex on the property. He's going to keep the existing house, build another a single family home on the property as well. It's all going to be rental stuff. It's not his residence or anything. So, this piece of property is very difficult to develop. There's a creek that goes through the middle of it, and not only a creek, but there's also a sewer main that goes through the middle of it along the creek. And then the land behind the creek, there's a steep slope, and you can't really build on it either. About half the property isn't even buildable. And Campen could build more, than those the three new structures he wants to build. But that's what he's decided now. When Planning Commission looks at zoning, they are supposed to look at all possible uses, not the one the developer has in mind, because you can sell the land and somebody else, the new owner, can do whatever they want with it within that zoning regulation. Anyway, former councilwoman Carleen Malone, who served 3 terms back in the 90s and early 2000s, representing Fountain City Town Hall, which is kind of a neighborhood, or it's more than just one neighborhood, but it's kind of a neighborhood umbrella group in Fountain City. She represents them and was adamantly opposed to the change in zoning, and thought that that it needs to be there's no need for that she saw of changing the zoning. It would just that he could go in and put in create larger lots and be able to do it that way. And she was and also that one of the things you've got to do when you want to rezone property is you've got to show that things have changed. That there's if you're wanting to build an apartment building somewhere, you've got to show that the area and the around that piece of property has changed, and there are other apartment buildings, and there's other commercial stuff going on there too. And one of the things that they point out, and the planning staff pointed this out too, nothing's changed in that area. I mean, it's been pretty stable for the last 30 years, and it went back and forth a little bit. I mean, one of the things that Campen talked about and others talked about, Planning Commission talked about, is the city really is trying to encourage increased density, more housing to be built to handle with the housing shortage that we have, and that this would this is basically would basically take a piece of property where there's one house and adding 3 other dwelling units. So and really not take up the entire piece of property. He was talking about putting in a conservation easement in the back end where the slope is, and he couldn't build anyway. Talking about doing that, but the Planning Commission, majority of the Planning Commission, sided with former Councilwoman Malone and denied Campen's request for rezoning. So that killed it for now, although he does have the option of appealing to City Council. And so we could see another instance, and this time of 2 former council members appealing to the current council
Right.
on a land use matter. So,
well, and didn't Malone suggest that Campen could actually do most of what he wanted without rezoning just by getting essentially a waiver from the Board of Zoning?
Yeah,
Appeals?
well, she suggested that because that he could go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which would still have the same zoning, but they could give a waiver, because of what could be considered a hardship, and that would be you never know what a hardship is, and a couple of planning commissioners said, "Wait a minute, we don't want to tell people to go to the BZA for hardship when we don't know what a hardship is." It's but you can look at it, and the fact that the slope isn't a hardship, but there is a sewer line going through the middle of it, and that could present you could argue that presents a true hardship, although the sewer line is follows the creek, which is in a floodplain. Although it's not a designated floodplain, you still wouldn't be able to build on it. So I mean, it's tricky, but yeah, she suggested that he go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. My guess is he's probably going to take his chances with City Council.
Right. Well, so we'll see what happens there. All right. Well, let's look ahead to some things going on this week. Speaking of zoning, should be some interesting discussion. Well, actually, it's a little unclear how much discussion there's going to be of this, but County Commission is holding a couple of meetings this Monday. The first is their sort of informal agenda review session that they've started doing every month after they changed their monthly schedule a few months ago. And so now their County Commission's regular voting meeting will be the next Monday on the 23rd. But this Monday, the 16th, they will have an informal review session at 3 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building to just kind of talk about anything on that agenda on the 23rd that any commissioners have questions about. And at a quick glance, I'm going to say that very little off that agenda jumped out at me as looking particularly controversial, but you never know what somebody might decide to make an issue of. More substantively, this Monday, they're having their monthly zoning meeting at 5 p.m., also in the main assembly room of the City County building, and that is where they hear rezoning requests that have come through Planning Commission, or that's typically what they hear at this meeting. And so they do have a whole bunch of those, including several requested amendments to the county's new comprehensive land use plan, because in adopting that plan back in April, one thing that Commission put into the plan was that if you want to make an amendment to the plan, we're only going to consider those 4 times a year. That there will be quarterly periods where you can bring those, because under the old plan, they were having that happen every month. And the argument was, we have a new plan here. Let's not be tinkering with it every single month. Let's be a little more thoughtful about it. So they do have several of those proposed changes to that brand new plan coming, which are all related to specific pieces of property where somebody wants to do something that the current plan doesn't contemplate. And so they have to get an amendment to the plan before they can get the rezoning to do whatever it is they want to do. The most interesting thing, though, that has arisen around this meeting is that just on Thursday this week, brand new County Commissioner Andy Fox, who represents the 9th District in South Knox County, went on to, there is an online public forum that County Commission uses. It's not heavily used, but they do use it some. And this is where county commissioners can talk among themselves about things on their upcoming agendas, because it is in public and there's a public record of it. Anybody, you can find a link to it on their website. Anybody can go in and read what they talk about there. And so Fox went on there and said he wants to bring a resolution to this Monday's meeting, and he wanted to add it to the agenda. Now, Commission Chair Gina Oster responded there on the forum saying, sorry, you missed the deadline. Fox, again, he's one of the 5 new county commissioners who were just sworn in this month. And so, probably takes them a little time to get up to speed on what the exact schedule and calendar is. But Oster told him, well, you can still add this resolution at the meeting on Monday if you want to try, but you need to get a 2/3 vote of county commission to do that, because to add something to an agenda that has already been published for the public, you need a 2/3 majority. That would be 8 of the 11 commissioners would have to approve it. Fox said he is going to try to do that. If he doesn't manage to, I think there's a good chance he'll then, try to bring it the next month. But what is interesting about this resolution, what he wants to do is he wants county commission to initiate a set of rezonings. That's not normally how rezonings work. Usually a rezoning is a request from a property owner who says, hey, I want to do this thing with my property, but my zoning doesn't allow it. So they go to planning commission, and then they come to county commission, or if they're in the city, they go to city council to get sign off on it. But county commission does have the power to request a rezoning of a property on its own. And that is what he is seeking to do. And there's 3 properties that he wants to downzone. And what a downzoning means is that's when you reduce the amount of the kinds of uses that would be allowed on a property. So in this case, for example, one of the pieces of property is currently commercially zoned. He wants to rezone it back to its prior zone of agricultural uses. There's a lot of things you can do in a commercially zoned property that you cannot do in agricultural zones. And that particular property, but he's basically talking about 3 different properties. 2 of them are parts of the very controversial Thunder Mountain development in South Knox County that we have talked about. It's sort of a big stretch of land kind of mostly between Chapman Highway and Sevierville Pike and the Dry Hollow community. And Thunder Mountain is the development company that is doing residential development there. They want to do commercial development along Chapman Highway. It's a big development, and the local community has been very opposed to it for the last couple of years as it's been working through. These properties were just rezoned in August by county commission at the request of Thunder Mountain over the objections of the local communities. Andy Fox, in running for office this year, made very clear that he has grave concerns about adding more density in the more rural areas of the county. And he showed up at the August meeting. Of course, he wasn't on commission yet, but he showed up at the August meeting to argue against this and say, don't do this. People who live there don't want it. It's bad for the local communities. But it did get passed by county commission. So now Fox is on county commission. He was just sworn in, and he immediately is coming in saying, I want to reverse this. I want to take back the rezonings that we just did. And then the 3rd property is one on Tipton Station Road that, again, it's a residential development. People in the community have objected to, saying it is too dense, going to bring too many people, too much traffic. He wants to also reverse that rezoning. And Scott, I think is no exaggeration to say that is a highly unusual request to see out of either county commission or city council, where a sitting legislator is picking out a handful of properties and against the wishes of the property owners and saying, I want to reduce their zoning and reduce the number of things that they can do on their properties.
Yeah, that just doesn't happen. Yeah. I don't recall that happening in the past. Now you had the Recode Knoxville process where the city rewrote the zoning code for the entire city.
Yeah.
And the zoning designations were changed, although they did try their best, although they failed in some instances, try their best to keep the land use pretty much the same, from in the new code as it was in the old code. But as far as just going in and picking out a piece of property or two to change the zoning, especially when they just passed it, the rezoning, is I won't say unprecedented, because that's I'm sure it's happened, but boy, it's rare.
Yeah, I mean, the closest things that I can think of to this in recent times was not in the county. It was in the city, where there have been a couple of properties over like the last 20 years where historic properties that were in danger of falling down. The old South High School is one of them. The Cal Johnson building on State Street is another one, where city council did put in a historic overlay zoning on those against the wishes of the property owners. But that didn't change their underlying zoning. What it mostly did was make it harder for them to knock the buildings down, because that was really what city council was trying to do.
Yeah, harder, but not impossible.
Right. And so they did do that. And, property owners actually have a lot of legal protections against this kind of thing. There is a legal standard called arbitrary and capricious, where property decisions that affect your use of your property cannot be arbitrary and capricious. One of the an arbitrary and capricious it's a legal term of art, and it often has to be adjudicated by a judge who decides whether some action was arbitrary and capricious. But one of the hallmarks of that is exactly what you're saying. It's when you're picking out an individual property. You're not like looking at the whole city like Recode Knoxville did, but you're saying on this one property, I just want to go in and change the zone against the wishes of the property owner. That is the kind of thing that certainly would be challenged by the property owner, and if and when this actually comes to County Commission for discussion, whether that happens at Monday's meeting or next month, I imagine there will be a lot of talk about that, and to what degree this kind of action might be legal. But it's interesting, and I think it shows, not probably to anybody's surprise, that Andy Fox, who is a litigator, he's a lawyer himself, he is an ideologue. He ran for commission explicitly saying he wants to preserve and promote Christian conservative values, and he wants to keep South Knox County in particular, where he lives and represents the area now, from turning more liberal. He has identified as a primary cause of liberalism housing density. And basically, he's looked at places around the country and seen that places that are more densely populated tend to vote more liberal. Places that are less densely populated tend to vote more conservative. And so he's kind of like, I think, on the ground in South Knox County trying to say, and I don't know exactly where that line is. Like, do you turn more liberal at 3 dwelling units per acre or 5 dwelling units per acre? Like what that formula is. And Fox probably doesn't know exactly what it is either. But I think what he's trying to do is say just less. Like we want less. So it's an interesting, he's sending up an interesting flare here. Whatever happens at Monday's meeting, whether or not he can get the 8 votes to add this to the agenda this month, I just think it's clear that Andy Fox is going to be pretty active on County Commission.
That's he's making some noise coming out of the gate.
For sure. And so those commission meetings happen on Monday, and then Scott, City Council is in session on Tuesday.
Yeah, City Council's in session. One of the interesting things that it's actually several interesting things. It's kind of Bridge Engineering Week. They are looking at making bridge repairs to Boyd's Bridge and to the East Greenway Drive Bridge. Not an imaginative name, but it's a bridge over Whites Creek in North Knoxville. And they're going to be voting on the contracts for engineering work before the repairs. Just to, what do we need to do? Everything else. Of course, you look at bridge. You talk about bridge repairs right now in the city of Knoxville, and everybody says, "Oh, well, what about the Gay Street Bridge?" Well, there is a budget amendment where they're going to be setting aside $850,000, if council approves, for the engineering work for the Gay Street Bridge. It may not cost that much, but they're from what administration officials told me, but they've got it. They'll have it ready just in case it does. They are going to be looking at a firm. They were talking about at one point using the same engineering firm that did work for the state on the Gay Street Bridge. That is, they weren't able to come to an agreement, or haven't been yet able to come to an agreement with that firm. So they'll be looking for a firm to come in and say, this is exactly what you need to do. This is how you need to do it, and we'll, do the engineering work, and then then there'll be a multi-million-dollar repair job that will go out as well. So that's all happening. One of the biggest things that's probably going to happen at Tuesday's meeting, and it will be Tuesday, 6:00, is when City Council meets, is the high-rise 18-story, 270-unit apartment building that's planned for downtown Knoxville near basically Neyland Drive and Hill Avenue is going to be considered by City Council for the first time. The Overlook condominium building, which sits on Hill Avenue and will have their views of the river altered or obliterated by this building if it's built. They have tried to stop it. They are appealing a ruling by the Planning Commission, which upheld a ruling by the Board of Zoning Appeals that gave them the go ahead to build the building. And so this is the first time that City Council is going to take a look at this and see if they uphold the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission's decisions. There will likely be a lot of people there talking about this, both for and against, and it'll be a good gauge to see, where the City Council stands on this. Now, it will probably come back again if City Council upholds this. They could go ahead and start building. I mean, they can get a building permit and start construction, but they have said they want to seek a payment in lieu of tax agreement with the city, which means that will come to City Council as well. So there'll be council will probably get a couple of bites at this apple, but this is an appeal that they will hear on Tuesday, and we kind of see what they think of the lay of the land.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning because when we talked about this project before, I made a comment about how the opponents to it were sort of like literally NIMBYs because it's people who live in the Overlook and in the river house next to it, and it is kind of in their backyard. It's in the property right behind them, and it certainly would obstruct their views of the river. However, one of those residents made the point that it's not just the views we're worried about. We're worried about the overall impact of putting that many people and that many cars on that steep little section of Locust going down toward Neyland Drive there, and that that it's out of scale with the whole area and could have negative impacts and safety concerns beyond just the fact that it's going to block their view of the river. So just wanted to throw that in there, that their objections are on multiple fronts, not just the fact that they won't be able to see the river.
And if you've ever been, of course, we go through there all the time, but if you've ever been on Hill at Locust, first of all, just driving down Locust is not for the faint of heart.
It's a steep grade,
very steep, and curves at the bottom. And it will. I mean, this is going to be 270 units, so you kind of think 270 vehicles are pretty close to it, going in and out of that area all the time. So that would be that's a legitimate concern. I don't know if it's a disqualifying concern, but it's a legitimate one. And there are other people besides the people who. The residents of the Overlook were the ones who brought the appeal, but there are others who have weighed in both at the Board of Zoning Appeals meetings and online and everything else about who do think it's out of scale. I mean, it's the tallest building, if it gets built, the tallest building built in Knoxville in years, and decades, and it will. It's like 18 stories tall. It
won't stand out on the skyline because they would be building up from the river.
Up from the river. Yeah, if you're over on Main Street looking over, you'll see the top of it, but it's not out of scale with the overlook or any of the other buildings there. But if you go around to Neyland Drive, it's going to be a tower.
Yeah,
and it will be the primary thing you see when you come into Knoxville on the Henley Bridge.
Yep.
I mean, if you come up Chapman Highway to the Henley Bridge, that's what you're going to see.
Yeah, for sure.
That's Knoxville. Welcome to Knoxville. This is a big building, and so there are not only the people in the Overlook that have multiple concerns, but other people do as well.
Sure.
But then you've got but then you've got a property owner who they got the property, they got a plan for it. It apparently meets all the zoning. I mean, you talk about being 17 stories tall. There's no height restrictions on buildings downtown. So they've got a plan to develop their property in a legal manner. And so those are the competing interests that frequently come before city council, county commission, and other bodies that they have to determine the proper course of action.
Right. All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about those things and whatever else happens between now and then. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Big Ears performer William Wright. We'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.